What's up, pumpers? Jerome here with another classic Season of Mastery video. Today we're going to be talking about the absolutely insane potential that Hardcore WoW has to offer and some ideas and improvements to make the mode even bigger and better. If you liked the video, please click that like button. Don't forget to click the subscription button as well and click that notification bell, or I won't be able to keep making videos like this one.
You are not prepared.
So Season of Mastery launched November 16th, and we've already seen the world's first level 60, which was Zarant a few days after the game launched, as well as the world's first Ragnaros kill done by the guild WHO, aka WHO, a few days ago. If you're wondering why it took so long for a guild to clear Molten Core, it's because many smart players are focused on ranking right now. If you look at the rank gear, for example, for a warrior, it's absolutely leagues ahead of any of the gear you're going to get in Molten Core for the most part. So it just makes a lot of sense right now to be doing ranking, especially with the accelerated timeline in Season of Mastery for ranking. You're going to be taking about half the time. So absolutely a logical move for a lot of guilds, and they're not really as focused on those early Molten Core kills. As a side note, if you're wondering why it's taken so long for a guild to clear Molten Core, number one, there are new hard mechanics that they've added in Season of Mastery, and of course, a lot of people are focused on ranking right now, as the rank gear is absolutely absurd and significantly easier to get this time around with a shortened ranking schedule. So a lot of people are focused on ranking instead of raiding right now. While people have been raiding, there's been a massive community event going on, which is Hardcore World of Warcraft. So essentially, you have to get to level 60 without dying, without trading other players, and without using the auction house. Meanwhile, once you get to 60, there's going to be a Road to Ragnaros event where we try to kill Ragnaros without dying, and it's going to be an absolutely massive event. Blizzard has also shown some support with the Soul of Iron buff, which will track if people are actually deathless or not, and shows an in-game indicator similar to, for example, RuneScape. You can see if someone is a hardcore Iron Man, and it's just a really awesome way to distinguish players that are actually deathless and doing the challenge. By all indications, Hardcore WoW is growing rapidly. The guilds are growing, the Discord's growing, the Twitch streams Evolve seem to be growing, the content creators are growing, and this is such a huge, awesome thing for the game. We're seeing a new spotlight on speed leveling, on challenge running, and one of the best things about this is this has been a very neglected part of WoW for such a long time. There's been a huge focus on things like mount collecting, but here's the problem. You can't get every single mount in the game. A new player is not going to really feel that drive the way you might with challenge running. When I start a game like Dark Souls or WoW, I could immediately get into challenge running day one and be part of that community and watching streamers and watching content and learning guides, for example. And even if you're not very good at the start, you're already invested and you're already in there. And it doesn't feel like a huge task to get somebody involved and excited about Hardcore WoW. And so I have a huge amount of optimism for the mode. My dream eventually would be to see a hardcore dedicated server and eventually maybe some sort of dead man mode style RuneScape tournament, but for WoW. So basically we see maybe a 3-month period of a hardcore server, which then people that reach level 60 are then in some sort of event or tournament where you can race and get to level 60, and there's prizes for classes, for example, and it would just be a really cool way to shine a spotlight on speed levelers every so often and hardcore WoW players. So I wanted to come up with a giant list of ideas, so without further ado, let's get to the list. The first thing I want to see change, if we do end up seeing hardcore dedicated servers, would be mob pathing. So mob pathing is very complicated, but it's one of the things, if you ask a lot of speed levelers, the first thing they're going to want changed is mob pathing. So mob pathing is all encompassing, right? It covers basically the way that mobs aggro, the way that mobs run towards you, the way that they leash, and all of these things could be tightened up and improved. One obvious thing to improve would be getting rid of evade bugs. So for example, you can evade bug in pretty much any dungeon in Classic, and this makes there be not nearly as much risk in dungeons as there really should be. For example, in Dead Mines, you can just go on the giant wheel on the boat area. It's one of the most dangerous areas, but you never have to really worry about wiping. Things like this take a little bit of excitement out of the mode for me, and I want to see good players pushing the limits of the game, but also paying the price when they make mistakes. Also, with mob pathing, maybe some changes to, for example, the way leashes work. And leash mechanics are very well known right now and understood. Maybe they could be tightened up a little bit to make it a little scarier to pull a lot of mobs and kind of, punish mistakes a little bit more. But I'm sure we could have some kind of large round table about how to improve mob pathing and just sort of tighten it up and think about what could be improved. I also want to see new mob mechanics in general, and to do this, I want to do exactly what Classic Season Mastery did, which is to go back to the notes and ideas of the original devs and see what sort of mechanics could a mob or boss have. Like what Baron Geddon, okay, what was this exactly the way the devs intended? So maybe even go back and consult the original devs and look at every single mob and look at the notes and see, is this how this mob was meant to be designed and exactly the vision of the developers? So the idea would be essentially to go back to the original vision of the developers, consult them, talk to them, look at their notes, and see, are the mobs behaving the way we want in terms of mob pathing, in terms of mechanics? Is everything exactly the way we wanted it, or were some of these things sort of compromise and limitation of the day? Can we make things exactly the way they were meant to be back in 2004? And I think that would make things a lot more interesting, giving mobs more attacks, giving them more variety. Maybe the mob AI could be improved. Maybe the way that mobs interact, the way that they chain together could be improved. Really anything that the original developers and people looking at the game now could think of to improve the mob AI, make the fights more dynamic and more interesting and more entertaining for viewers and players, I think is worth looking into. In the same vein, I want to see the original developer intention and vision of mob patrols finally realized. And there's no way that the developers truly wanted something like Mora Ladim to behave the way it does today, which is a relatively lame, like little circle route, no risk for the players involved, just, pathing in a circle. I'm sure the developers would have wanted it to be more dynamic for a little more excitement and randomization. Imagine Mora Ladim or whatever patrol you can think of. I really think there's potential to make patrols more interesting. For example, imagine elite mobs just rolling up near the inn of your favorite city, for example, just keeping things exciting, keeping things interesting, and less static and stagnant. A controversial idea I have is the idea of limiting certain add-ons in hardcore, especially hardcore, but in Season Mastery in general. Things like unit scan really do take away from hardcore. So you have a giant indicator when you walk near a mob. So for example, you could put a named mob into the unit scan, and then the second you're within, a large radius of that mob, you're going to be triggering an alert. And it makes it so you no longer really have to stress out in an area like Duskwood, which should be very stressful and very difficult. You can just sort of wander through, and unit scan will keep you safe. I want to see unit scan drop down to maybe 10-15 yard radius of detection. Make it similar to a spy nerf, right? We saw spy get nerfed in Classic, and this is exactly the same as spy. Obviously, it's not player versus player, but ultimately, why should you be getting a huge radius of warning of something like Terramis? These mobs are meant to be exciting and surprising and shocking, and if you have unit scan, none of that is going to be happening. You're just going to run the opposite way and barely even blink. You'll never be in any risk. I want to see more risk. I want to see more randomization, and I want to see more excitement in hardcore. Speaking of Terramis, I do want to see some griefing changes implemented as well. So the biggest one is obviously any PvP related griefing needs to be changed. And so in hardcore, I do want to eventually see a hardcore PvP server. That's, maybe a discussion for another time. But right now, there are some things that really need to be addressed. For example, the mind control cap, right? So this is a way that people can trick someone into attacking a mob, which ends up being actually attacking that player. Then you're flagged. So for example, a rogue might mind control cap a mob right when you're about to attack it. The second you attack it, boom, you've actually flagged, and now he can kill you. So this is a big problem with griefing. Anybody is susceptible to this. If you've been playing for 20 hours straight, you're gonna pretty easily fall for this trick. I'm all for having fun and interesting mechanics and things that you can use to have fun with your friends and trick people and troll them a little bit, just in a fun way. But in hardcore, there's really not as much room for that. I do want to see, at least if there's going to be a hardcore server, anything like that ideally changed. I'm not saying remove from the main game and Season Mastery in general. I do think there is a time and a place for things like that. But in hardcore, it's just too devastating if you fall for something like this, and there's not really a counterplay. Another controversial thing would be kiting mobs like Terramis into cities, and I am a little bit contrarian in this take. I do not think it is nearly as harmful as something like the mind control cap. At the same time, I don't really want to see somebody new to the game mode getting frustrated because of Terramis ending up in the city. There could be some kind of middle ground. Maybe, I don't know, Terramis doesn't do the AoE, for example, or something to make it so people aren't just randomly dying. But at the same time, I don't think mob kiting is like the end of the world. I actually do think Blizzard could even add in more random events with NPCs and for example, things ending up in places that are thought to be safe. Like the safe zones are not as exciting if you can't have a dragon randomly running through them. I mean, I swear I was in Red Ridge at some point and we all stopped and watched a dragon run past us. It was absolutely hilarious. And I mean, you just don't forget moments like that, right? I don't think mob kiting is inherently really bad for the game. And the reason why is because it does kind of keep people on their toes and excited. If Blizzard could find a way to keep people on their toes and excited without having somebody griefing the whole time, that'd be cool. But I don't think it's really hurting the mode right now. It's definitely frustrating if you die. I'm not saying I advocate for it, but maybe there's some kind of middle ground. You change some of the mechanics a little bit to make them less punishing. But at the same time, you don't get rid of the kind of spontaneity and excitement that something like Terramist showing up in Stormwind can bring. Maybe you even add in these things as NPCs, for example. Maybe an NPC kites Terramist to the city every half hour, and everyone has to run for cover. I mean, that sounds like a silly idea, but there's something you could do to have middle ground. I like the excitement, I like the randomness, but I don't like the outright griefing. But there's definitely some discussions to be had here on ways to improve the excitement and camaraderie of hardcore so that people are, communicating and talking to each other and not just playing silently by themselves, which is something I worry about with a mode like this. And so far, we haven't seen that as a problem, but it's something to monitor. If all the griefing's removed, if everybody is just kind of playing for themselves, then what's the real reason to be talking other than maybe to say congrats when someone gets a level or something? I like the idea of people communicating and being like, oh my god, there's a dragon over here, oh my god, Stitch is over here, you gotta stay clear of this area. That's the kind of exciting stuff I love in this mode, and I do not want to lose that either. Another thing I'd love to see in a hardcore server would be the rework of Quest XP and Mob XP as well. The idea is simply reward exciting and interesting gameplay and maybe punish a little bit static and more boring gameplay. And already the game mode has done that with the 40% boosted XP for quests. You're encouraging people to get away from mob grinding and safely playing the game and move them towards questing, which is inherently riskier. But I think there's still more steps to be done there to make the questing even more exciting. Obviously, the very best players are already doing the elite quests, but getting everyone to do them would be really awesome. Of course, a lot of the very best players already do the elite quests, but especially when they're solo, this is going to be a very, very big challenge. And I would love to see more incentive to go back and do these really difficult quests, and ideally move away from the safe and kind of more boring quests. I think there are changes you could make in the leveling stages to make classes like Hunters a little less strong and try to prop up the class at the bottom, ideally just to get a little more variety. I'm sure people would still play Hunters, but it would be nice to have to really think about that. What class do you want to play? And maybe even looking into some small leveling balance tweaks. I know a lot of things in TPC, for example, were really smart changes. So, for example, Druid was able to level with a much better talent tree. Things like that could be maybe even looked at, moving things slightly here and there to make the leveling experience better for certain classes and a little bit worse for the class at the very, very top, so that in future tournaments and events, we don't just see a million Hunters at the top and every other class completely ignored. Another idea I want to see is very, very prevalent in my mind after watching a mass world disconnect issue. The servers all went down, and then boom, a lot of people lost their hardcore characters. This is unacceptable in a hardcore mode. Of course, people will get DDoSed. Of course, people will disconnect randomly and have internet issues and power issues and God knows what. But you cannot have catastrophic failure like this. It'll be far too incentivized by bad actors and people that want to crash the servers. If there's no rollback protection. So rollback protection will be a simple idea here, is basically if the server crashes, then we rewind maybe a minute or two and just reset all combat so everyone's safe. Or there's got to be some way you could do it where people are all 100% safe. Maybe if a server crashes, you erase any death that happened in the last 30 seconds, and then boom, you teleport everyone to their Hearthstone location. World disconnect protection and rollbacks and things to protect people from losing their characters when the server disconnects are definitely something Blizzard needs to look into, because yes, people are going to disconnect all the time and get DDoS and God knows what, but at the same time, if the actual server itself is going down a lot and causing death, that's really, really bad, and people will quit the game and not come back. So that's definitely going to need to be resolved before hardcore becomes even bigger and more serious, and with, you know, big events and everything like that. The last thing I want is much more tracking. And obviously, we've already seen leaked in the past achievements for Classic. I'm not sure when that'll happen, but there needs to be way more stuff around Hardcore and achievements. Obviously, we could have a Twitter, for example, that tracks big name deaths and people at like level 40 plus. We could have an in-game, you know, tracker, or maybe like a giant leaderboard made by Blizzard, similar to the Hardcore add-on. We could have something on the Blizzard website, or maybe something on, you know, Warcraft logs, whatever it is, and that tracks everyone's, you know, progress and who's died and who hasn't. And it's all done in real time, and everyone's keeping up with everything. Heck, you could even implement some of the features of the Hardcore add-on into the WoW client itself, so everybody on the server knows when someone dies, for example, or when someone hits 60. It's really cool stuff, and I don't think it would take that much dev work. Another complaint that we saw in Hardcore was that there was no confirmation or reward at 60 at all. The game kind of just keeps on going. Maybe a little announcement or a little dialogue, whatever it is, something to say, hey, you did it. There's a lot more that could be done with achievements and recognition, and it's something that, you know, hey, it doesn't have to be a big deal or something that costs Blizzard money. I mean, if 2 balloons fly into the sky after you hit 60, or some fireworks or something, that's all you really need. People aren't going to ask for much, but the more that Blizzard can add and the more little things they do, it'll all just kind of add to the package and make people feel that much more special, and make that the journey I felt that much more meaningful when they do hit 60. Well, that's all I have for today on suggestions for Hardcore WoW. I'm absolutely loving it so far. I would love to hear in the comment section below what your biggest dream change for Hardcore would be, and whether you'd want a Hardcore server or not. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to have a great day.